Welcome back, everyone, to Issues of Faith. We're doing something a little different on Issues of Faith. We're airing an interview from Open Line with Father Ed Steiner. The topic is exorcisms. Fascinating information. Let's get back to that interview right now. But let's say there's someone who calls and says, I don't believe this. I don't believe that, I've seen it in movies. I maybe think it's something that's done in movies, but I don't believe this is real life.
Right.
What do you say?
A person of faith isn't necessarily required to believe that these things can happen. Number one, and number two, when we think about it, whether we're talking about angels appearing or saints appearing or evil appearing, we're looking at something that's beyond science, beyond explanation. Even though they have all these shows, trying to find ghosts and hauntings, all of this is, we're trying to believe something that truly is supernatural. And we're in the natural world, and that we can't jump to that belief unless we've experienced it. And for good or for bad, thank goodness, very few people have.
You personally have not encountered that.
No.
But someone that you have talked to and respect and believe has encountered that.
Yes.
And so your personal opinion is that's real.
Absolutely.
So that's pretty scary.
It is. It is. And a good priest friend of mine, he's received a couple of phone calls about going to do an exorcism, and he has the same line: homie, don't do no exorcisms. Homie, don't do no Ghostbusters. I don't do Ghostbusters. So, he believes it deeply enough that, no, he wants somebody that's a little more trained and a little more. And then there's a ritual that the priest who's going to do the exorcism has to go through. Before he goes to do the exorcism, he must first go to confession. Then he must celebrate Mass. Then he must spend time in private prayer, significant time in private prayer, and then and only then is he ready to get up, leave the house, or go wherever to be with the person. And there always has to be other people present. It's never just one-on-one. He said that they always have a physician on hand, we have a psychiatrist on hand, and family members, because when you start going through the ritual, there's a lot of prayers that people have to respond to. So you got to have people there to make the responses.
And what impact does that have on his life to have witnessed that and to truly believe that he was in the presence of that kind of evil? How does that impact his life and I guess your life through him? But how does that impact? How should it impact our lives?
Well, he says, like anybody that faces trauma of any kind, of course this is a little bit different than most kinds of trauma, but people witness evil things a lot, shootings and stabbings and, bad things. But he voluntarily puts himself in a little bit of therapy, and then he also goes for spiritual direction to another priest. And he said that that's sort of de rigueur. That's just sort of expected, because you got to keep your own head on straight after you witness something like that.
Did you ask, in those cases, do you remove the bad presence? Is the person one moment in this bad state and the next, do they get better? Or what happens a year later?
He said that it's, in the 3 he's done, it's never been this dramatic thing like on The Exorcist, where all of a sudden all of the color returns to normal and the person is just nice and loving. But it's clear they're absolutely at peace and relieved. And always there's follow-up therapy afterwards, psychotherapy or something afterwards. So the person is returned to life, but they themselves have been through a trauma. And so they really do have to do some therapy afterwards, to kind of get their life back together. They've probably hurt some people's feelings, if not outright hurt people. They probably created mayhem, wherever. So they've got to deal with those things.
This is not the kind of thing somebody could fake.
No. I did have a psychologist call me once. She had a client, again, that the client was convinced she was possessed, and had an aversion to, she couldn't even walk on the sidewalk past a church. So we did these little exercises, get her walk by, and we slowly walked her into the church. But in watching her behavior, she reacted sort of the right ways to all the stimuli, but it became apparent to me that she's not possessed. she's got problems, but she's not possessed. I mean, she needs love and care, and that's where that psychologist had to dig into her background and say, what traumatized her? This is the way she's responding.
And that's the vast majority, but then there are these other rare instances.
Right. And it's interesting because exorcisms in the United States are very rare, very, very rare. And when you start getting into areas and countries where there's a lot lower education, there seems to be a correlation between the thoughts of possession and lack of education. For example, we have we do a lot of ministry in Haiti. A lot of our Catholic churches do a lot of Haitian ministry. Well, exorcisms there are not uncommon. And now, I haven't done a lot of reading, I haven't witnessed it myself, but in a country that has very little mental care and virtually no mental health care, are we looking at epilepsy? Are we looking at other problems? That I don't know. But where there's still in places where there's still a lot of superstition, in areas where voodoo is practiced, which is kind of a really warped out adoption of Catholicism with some other native cultures, or in tribal societies where there are a lot of they might have become Christian, but they believe in all the gods of nature and all this stuff. So you see it a lot more than those kinds of places.
You have studied this issue.
Yes.
You have talked to people that you know and trust and believe that this is real.
Right.
There has not been one in our diocese, right, here in the Nashville area that you're aware of.
Not that I'm aware of.
Recently, at least. There is some confidentiality, I guess, around these issues.
Yes.
And how is that done?
Up until just a handful of years ago, every diocese is required to have an exorcist. But up until just a few years ago, only the bishop knew who it would be, or who it was at the time, because he didn't want just somebody saying, "Oh, I think I'm possessed," and bothering this poor priest, showing up at the rectory all hours of the night. So that was protected. Then when a person comes in, the whole process itself is confidential, and then the fact that a true exorcism has been performed is also confidential, if not certainly for the sake of the individual, but also the family. If you called us to come in and say, "Hey, our child, we think they're possessed," that's not, you don't want the neighborhood to know that. So there's an element of confidentiality to protect people.
Yes. How are we seeing more? I mean, are there more calls for this? Again, it doesn't sound like it is in our diocese here in the Nashville area, but what about when you spoke to the person you spoke to?
Yeah, he made it clear that the calls or the requests are going up. I certainly haven't talked with a lot of my brother priests, but we always, when we're together, we're always kind of comparing things, and some of the ones, especially in the rural areas, they're getting more calls than they normally would. So I would say that for whatever reason, there is kind of a movement with people becoming concerned with the occult and worried about it, and so we are getting more calls. I just don't know how many more and how widespread. And
how it bears out. Do those all pass all the tests that are put upon each call to actually rise to the level of what would qualify here? Right.
Usually in a phone call you can, in your mind anyway, you're always going to be really careful and concerned with the person and pastoral and all of that, because they're hurting, they're scared. I mean, so you want to treat them that pastorally, but we can very quickly rule out in a phone call whether we're dealing with a real expression of the occult, of the supernatural. It doesn't take much conversation from our point of view to realize something is going on with the person. Something might be happening in the house, but this isn't. It's just not rising to that level.